Dr. Amanda Adams. She's been working with bats for over 20 years and specializes in behavioral and sensory ecology of bats, especially bioacoustics. As the Director of Research Coordination at BCI, she facilitates collaboration to promote bat conservation globally. And her title of her talk, which I really struggle in saying, so I've been practicing, is Fat Bats and the Bug Buffet. Oh, that was tough. Over to you, Amanda.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Amanda Adams, the Director of Research Coordination at Bat Conservation International. Today, I'm going to be sharing Fat Bats at the Bug Buffet, our research into how to enhance foraging habitat for bats affected by white nose syndrome. The white nose syndrome is a devastating infectious fungal disease that arrived in the United States in 2006. It was named because of this white fungus that you can see growing around the muzzles of hibernating bats. And even though it might appear cute, this is what a hibernating bat is supposed to look like without that white. You can see on the bats on the left of this photo. And as we dove more into investigating what was going on with these white-nosed bats, we quickly learned that it was more than just their muzzles having a white fuzz on them. Rather, it was a skin infection by a fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or PD for short, and that this fungus colonizes on the skin of bats in areas that don't have fur and eats away at that skin. And it causes quite a bit of damage. As you can see in this photo, when it's illuminated with ultraviolet light, we're able to see all these spots that highlight with yellow are areas that are essentially wounds on the bat's wings where the fungus has eaten away. The damage caused by this fungus causes the bats to wake up throughout the winter. So they're waking up because they're itchy, because they're getting dehydrated due to water loss from these wounds. And so they're waking up too often, and that's causing them to burn through their fat stores too fast, and so they don't survive the winter. And since this fungus's invasion, over 6 million hibernating bats have died, and it's probably way more than that. The fungus, or PD, first invaded in 2006 in a cave in New York that you can see on this map as indicated by this X. And over time, the fungus spread through the states, and now we can find it in 40 states in the United States and 8 provinces in Canada, covering coast to coast. And of our 44 bat species in the US and Canada, 12 of them are affected by white nose syndrome. One factor that makes white nose syndrome especially difficult to manage is that the fungus can persist in the environment, in the hibernacula, and reinfect the bats that do survive a winter, and then when they return the next year to hibernate. So each year they're getting weaker and weaker, and then eventually will die. White nose has caused catastrophic population declines. Colonies that previously were in the thousands now have fewer than 10 individuals remaining, and even some sites have local extinctions. In these graphs, we can see population reductions over time as the fungus established itself in the northeastern states of North America. So we have it plotted out for 4 different bat species, and we have on the y-axis the percent decline in the number of bats relative to what the populations were at before white nose invaded. So over time, like when it first invaded, northern long-eared bats were hit the hardest, and very quickly where the populations decreased by over 75%. And then as the fungus became more established in the environment, the species populations declined by over 90%. And we can see this very similar trend for tricolored bats, little brown bats, and Indiana bats. And due to this, we now have Northern long-eared bats are listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act since 2022. And we have the tricolored bat that is proposed to be listed as endangered in the very near future. So these two species that used to be common are now on the brink of extinction because of white nose syndrome. And this is really scary. It's devastating to see declines in these bat populations, and some species even being close to being lost altogether. And so scalable solutions are urgently needed to increase bat survival in these established areas of white nose syndrome where there is significant mortality has already occurred. So this has led to lots and lots of experiments and lots of research into ways to eradicate the fungus, treat the bats, and all of these things. And one of the studies that BCI has been working on came out of research by Dr. Tina Chang and colleagues in 2019 that showed that little brown bats with more fat had a better chance of surviving the winter. And so that leads us to the question of, how do we make bats fat? How can we help them survive the winter? And this led us to Operation Fat Bat. And if we could make it easier for bats to accumulate large fat reserves before hibernation, then we might be able to increase their chance of surviving the winter and thus white nose syndrome. So we designed a pilot project to test if bats could feed at artificial prey patches with ultraviolet lights attracting insects. And so it's well known that lights can attract insects, but the question is, if we create some artificial prey patches, will the bats come? So we tested if concentrating prey near known hibernacula during fall swarming could be beneficial for white nose affected bats. And our hypothesis was that we could enhance the foraging habitat by increasing insect density to improve their foraging efficiency, allowing bats to build up more fat before hibernation. Our pilot for the Fat Bat project was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where remnant populations of little brown bats hibernate in abandoned copper mines. The study ran in fall 2019 at 5 hibernacula, and at each hibernacula, we set up a location with a UV light to create an artificial prey patch, and then paired that with a location with no light as our control to compare against. And then at each location, we collected insects and recorded bat acoustic activity using Wildlife Acoustics song meter minis. Bats. So we had 2 questions. One, are we able to increase insect prey availability near these overwintering hibernation sites? And 2, will bats use the prey patches to increase their foraging efficiency? So for the first question, if we were able to attract insects near these hibernacula, we put out these lights and collected insects at the light and also at the control site with no light. And at all 5 sites, we collected many, many, many more insects at the sites where we had lights on, so our UV artificial prey patches, compared to when the lights were off. So in this graph, we're able to see the insect weight or biomass for all the insects that were collected at 5 sites, indicated by these letters up top, with the control or lights off and the lights on or the treatment artificial prey patches. And then each color is representing a different order of insect. So in you can see at each of these sites, the most common insect that we collected were Lepidoptera. or moths. So while it's not really surprising that the lights were successful at attracting insects, because that's a known thing that lights do, what was exciting to see is that they were very good at attracting moths, which happen to be the favorite food of bats. So we were able to create these prey patches. There are lots of insects there. Now, the next question is, do the bats use them? So will bats use the prey patches to increase their foraging efficiency? So at each of these sites, of the 5 locations that we collected insects at, we also put out Wildlife Acoustics song meter mini bats and recorded bat activity all night at both the control sites and the prey patch sites. So what we were looking for in our recordings was not just if bats were present, but if they were feeding at the prey patches. So when we record bat echolocation activity, we're able to identify those calls to species, and we're able to get a sense of what the bats are doing. So based on what we can see here as a spectrogram with each of these color lines being an echolocation pulse, this is an example of a search phase call, so when the bat is just flying by or flying through the area. But when bats are actually foraging, they use feeding buzzes or terminal feeding buzzes. And so their echolocation calls change as they go in and for the insect to capture it and eat it. And so when we're looking at all of our recordings, we're able to look for these feeding buzzes and identify if the bats were just flying around in the area or if they were actually feeding there. And we were able to see that, yes, they were definitely feeding there. So this figure is showing at the control and at the UV light prey patch the number of feeding buzzes that were recorded per night. The average activity across all of our nights and sites is indicated by this black line. And as you can see, the UV light, we had higher foraging activity than we did compared to the control. And it was actually 3 times more feeding activity at the prey patch than compared to at the control where there was no light. So creating these prey patches is a scalable solution, and little brown bats do take advantage of these artificial prey patches before hibernation. And we also tested this in spring when they were emerging from hibernation and found that they will also readily feed at these artificial prey patches when they wake up and are ready to go out in the spring. So we are now currently testing this with other species and habitats. We've actually set up across 9 states with 20 sites and are looking at this with other species such as the tricolored bat and Indiana bat across their ranges. And then our next exciting bit of research that we are also using song meter mini bats at is expanding this research to see if we can create natural prey patches by improving habitat near hibernacula. So we are testing if integrative vegetation management along utility corridors, also known as right-of-ways, near hibernacula can be beneficial for white-nose-affected bats. So are we able to plant and manage vegetation in a way that supports insect populations and thus provides lots of food for bats to get fat before they go into hibernation? So if you are excited about all these results and supporting white-nose-affected bats as much as I am, and you are looking for a way to help fatten bats in your own backyard, check out Bat Conservation International's guide for creating a bat garden. You can check this out at our website, batcon.org. And thank you very, very much for your interest in bats. And check out our website for lots more resources on how you can support bat conservation efforts in your area. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, amazing bunch of research there, and tackling something which is incredibly important as well at the same time. Hello, Amanda. That was, yeah, absolutely amazing. Look at the claps and the hearts that are going up. You can tell that it was liked by many, by many.
Thanks,
Um,
Paul.
and you go, amazing talk, and amazing talk just keeps appearing on the right hand side as well. So even better. But there are questions for you to answer, and many of them. Um, so if you're ready, I'll
I'm
fire some
ready.
at
Let's do
you.
it.
Uh, Thank you very much. Are there people in your group that study bat viruses? If there are not, do you send samples to other groups?
I love it. So yeah, we are actively working on some projects related to bat health, bat viruses, in partnership with USGS and other organizations across the United States. And we're also launching a new program at Bat Conservation International, which is our Bats in One Health program. So focusing on that intersection of bat health, environmental health, and human health, and kind of trying to look at that picture in a more holistic way. But yes, we partner with labs to collect viruses and get them sampled and looking at diversity of viruses, particularly in the US right now.
Yeah, no, that's really, and I suppose the thing is, it using things that are already set up. You've got that whole cauldron of expertise all just sitting there
Exactly.
waiting for you to pick their brains. So yeah, fantastic. Um, does climate change and global warming represent a threat for the WNS to
White
spread?
nose syndrome, yes.
Well, there you go. You've deciphered it. To spread to more tropical regions.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, climate change is definitely a threat to bat populations globally. In the context of white nose syndrome, uh, I'm not sure. I'm sure my colleague, Dr. Tina Chang, has a ready answer for this. Hopefully, we can get her on and answering in the future. But um, part of it is in terms of, I mean, the fungus has spread probably beyond what I guess I would have anticipated back in 2006 and 7, because it's a cold-loving fungus, so that's why it's found in these hibernacula. It likes those stable, cold environments. So it's pretty restricted, we hope, to temperate areas. So how increased temperature fluctuations will impact it could go in various ways. It's more how the fungus adapts to a wider range of temperatures that would have a bigger impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that the bats are still trying to hibernate in that sort of not solid, cool environment that so there's no fluctuation. So you'd, I mean,
Well,
as you
yeah.
say,
What we
how
are
the
seeing is that they are within a cave system. There's variation in microsites, and so they will choose different microsites within those hibernacula that we think are probably less infected or better for surviving with white nose syndrome.
on the back of that, I suppose is there an answer? Are there any updates regarding vaccinations or other treatments under development to combat one of them?
The National Wildlife Health Center has made progress in developing a vaccine, which to my knowledge is the first ever fungal vaccine, which is just incredible. We've partnered with them. I know they've expanded their field trials. So well, we're all kind of waited with bated breath to see how that continues to go.
How do they administer that? I mean, if you've got 10,000 bats,
Oral.
oh right,
It's
okay.
it's an oral administration. Yeah, the question is like large scale administration, but bats are very good at grooming. So if you get it on them, they'll probably groom it off and consume it.
Nice. So we're going to be bat spraying for a while. So excellent. Um, is the fungus transmittable to other animals or people?
No, so it's not transmittable to humans. We haven't seen any cases of it persisting on other organisms, so it seems to be very specific to bat tissue. But really, the problem is that while it's not infecting other things, the fungus is very hardy, like many other fungi, and so those spores are easily transported to other areas. And so that's why we go through very strict decontamination protocols, and it's really important to focus on what we call biosecurity and making sure if you go into environments that you make sure you're not inadvertently transporting materials from one environment to the other. Um, the scary thought is that there could be something else out there that could have another impact on something else that we don't even know it exists yet. You know, when it first showed up in the United States, like this fungus didn't even have a name, like had to completely like go through all the steps to identify it, you know?
I mean, that's come a long way from not knowing what something is to now actually coming up with a potential treatment in what,
Yeah.
under 20 years is actually a very fast process. Even though it doesn't sound very fast, it is a really fast
Not
process.
compared to COVID, but yes.
Oh, no.
Many other things, yes.
Well, the next question, and I'm sure I've heard the answer, but I'd like your opinion really. Is there a threat of white nose syndrome can spread to other continents? Do we know of it on other continents?
Yeah, so it has been there's research showing that it came from Eurasia. So it is already like we think native to Europe and Asia, and it seems that the bat populations there have uh adapted to it and aren't impacted by it now. Who knows, many thousands, millions of years ago that they might have been. The real threat is other temperate areas. So the primary concern of spread now are to locations like Australia, and
Yeah.
they are doing an amazing job of monitoring and making sure that doesn't happen.
Uh, Hi, Amanda. Thank you. There's lots of people say thank you. I'm trying to be quick,
Thanks.
but thank you. Um, what techniques do you use in your acoustic analysis in order to detect and extract feeding buzz signals, or do you do that manually? This is the
Ooh, love the acoustics
oh
questions. Um, yeah, so feeding buzzes have for a really long time been where the hard work is at. Like there wasn't any auto ID or anything for feeding buzzes. That might be changing soon. So in the beginning of this project, it was all manual. So lots of work, and shout out to my coworkers who have spent a lot of time with these acoustic files. But there are some developments that are on their way for some automated feeding buzz software and open source tools and everything that to train, and I look for those feeding buzzes and acoustics. So keep an eye out.
yeah, no, that's good advice. I mean, I've had to do something very similar, going through thousands of calls looking for feeding buzzers, and quite demoralizing. I'm only 23 years old, and look at me,
Ah,
just look at me.
all
Um,
those feeding. I look at recordings and I get like excited when I see feeding buzzes because there's been so much time in my life that I've been like looking for them manually that now if I just get one, like say on my echo meter touch, I'm like, oh, there was a feeding buzz. Did you guys see that? Pretty exciting.
somewhere near me. Oh, go for dinner sometime. Um, is the fungus? Does it live in fruit bats as well? That's good.
No, we don't, it's only in hibernating bats, so there aren't any fruit bats that hibernate.
Excellent. I'm trying to read these as fast as I can because so running out of time.
Oh,
We
it's
need to we
okay.
need to get these 4 hours long. I think it's the only way we can do it. Did you test survivability after treatment?
Oh my gosh. We tried. We have tried. Part of our study was doing some pit tagging and putting out pit tag readers at the cave entrances and also at our artificial feeding stations. So we're working with Biomark on some custom antennas to try and be able to detect these bats and tell if they were feeding at the prey patches. So we are we weren't able to get enough detections to get at survivability, but we did definitely see evidence of bats using the prey patches for extended periods of time and got a better sense of what was going on in the system and all these things, but we just didn't get the numbers to really say, yes, they survived because of fattening up at these prey patches. It a little demoralizing, but I won't dwell.
Well, let's hope that this is going to work. We want some nice fat bats. That's basically what we want.
Exactly. Such a
Yeah.
nice mental image.
Everyone's got an image of a nice fluffy fat bat now.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so. There are still more questions in the Q&A. If you could have
awesome.
a look at those as well.
I will.
And I'm just so sorry we've run out of time, but and we've got a few more silly things to finish off. But thank you, Amanda, as well for another amazing presentation. So
Thank you,
yeah,
Paul. Thank you, Wildlife Acoustics, and everyone who's out there supporting the bats.
yes, lots of clapping for bats, please. That's what we need to do. Thank you, Amanda.